Hi, welcome to the bathtub, where when you hear this music, we stop it really quick because we don't want to get sued. And Lucky comes over just because she heard the music and she thinks that's time for her to come say hello, and I have to put her down again. You know it's time for another episode of Pointless Adventures in Literature. Sometimes the adventures are pointless, sometimes they're meaningless, sometimes they're both pointless and meaningless, but they're always pointless, meaningless, or both. You can bank on that at the bathtub. It's brought to you by, Lucky down please, Acma, Amazon, and the Washington Post can kiss my ass, and that's particularly pertinent today because of Bessemer. We're not going to forget these people. And the Washington Post is all over Bezos's butt. Let's remember that. So we'll have to remember all that stuff, and then we'll move on to this. These are basically completely random, pointless, meaningless adventures, things that happened to me in my lifetime, in my long lifetime of inordinate success and glamorous lifestyle, which you witness here every week. This episode's called Why I Am So Famous. That is a bit facetious. And Lucky, please get down. So anyway, this is actually kind of following through. Okay. This is kind of carrying on from our great 2000th subscriber episode. Because one of the challenges I received was from our good buddy B.K. Smith out there, wherever he is, in Boston. I think he's in Boston, where all the good bookstores are. And he asked me to talk about my first novel. He wanted me to talk about my first novel, The History of Luminous Motion. This cover, it was like the first time they tried doing something fancy like this, where they had a see-through cover. I always thought it would look kind of hard to see. I never was really wild about this cover. But anyway, it won a lot of design awards. In fact, most people remember the cover. More people remember the cover than they remember my book, I'm afraid. That's my theory anyway. I'm drinking my martini, floral pattern martini glass, just like Philip Marlowe. So anyway, I thought I would just give a little quick history of this novel. It's the one novel I've written that some people know about. It was made into a movie which I've never seen, and I never intend to see it. And just because BK asked to hear about it, and I'll talk about it. You can hear what happened to me as a novelist. And this was the first novel I ever wrote. I was pretty much I was 31 or 32 when I wrote History of Luminous Motion. I thought I was going to spend my life writing short stories because I love short stories, and I thought I didn't really see myself. I don't have a lot of self-confidence as a writer, which is what short stories are sort of good for, because you can just kind of try anything crazy in a short story and you're done in a few weeks or a month or two. And if it doesn't work, you just don't worry about it. You go and do something else. And sitting down to a novel I always found kind of hard, and I had never found a novel I quite wanted to write. So I tried a few novels, never got around to it. Anyway, I was living in London, and the premise of the story, the premise of the novel, I can't remember quite where I got the premise. The premise is that it's a young kid. He's 6 or 7 years old when the book starts. He's 6 or 7, and he turns 8 in the course of the book. He's basically a genius. It's just kind of, I think, it's kind of the idea of telling a story from this super smart kid's head. And again, I'm not super smart, but I was in my 30s, so I figured if I could, throw around a little bit of philosophical bullshit and stuff like that, and put it in the mouth of a little kid, I could see how it worked. I also wanted to write about how little kids see the world, because I always remember being, as a child, thinking weird thoughts. I didn't think them very articulately, but the world is pretty a strange place, and you think a lot of strange things. And then I ended up with basically the opening premise is they're on the run. This kid and his mother are on the run, so it's a kind of a Bonnie and Clyde mom and son thing where they're on the run. You don't know what's going on, and I didn't know when I started. I had no idea. Just like with the short stories, I had no idea where the hell the book was going, but I did hear the kid, and I knew the mother was going to take them somewhere, and then I just literally got up every day. And after I got through the first few pages, I don't think I had any trouble writing that. Most novels, I come to a bit of a crisis somewhere, particularly in the beginning, whether it's working or not. And I don't think I stopped once in this book. or with my second novel that came later. I think both of them just took me along, and so it was great fun. I just really enjoyed following this kid's point of view and writing it in this kind of hyper inflated extra poetic kids language, and making this kind of this world. And then basically all the rest of the stuff was stuff I knew. So I knew a lot about driving around California because I was constantly moving, and I knew all those routes that they took up and down the Grapevine and up and down 101, routes that I still like driving, by the way. And I was living in London at the time. I was living in a bedsit. I was renting a room from a guy who was just a total drunk, weird character. Not a bad guy, but just a weird, strange character. And I was in this little tiny flat with this giant Amstrad computer writing on this. I'd written a bunch of short stories, and I was kind of steaming along. And I didn't have any much of a work. I think I worked in some pubs, and I wrote a little reviewing at the time. But every day I could spend about an hour or two writing this novel. And it went along, and I got it finished. And I had just sold my first short story collection, and we started to send it around. Okay, so I finished this novel, and I thought it was pretty good. And my agent thought it was pretty good. And we sent it to all sorts of publishers. And nobody knew who I was, and my stuff was. I guess it was a little strange at the time. I don't think it would be that unusual now. But a lot of people they said, oh, they want to read the book, and then they all turned it down. We got lots of kind of positive, oh yeah, this is really interesting, we really like this. And then they take them into meetings, and they would really get shot down in meetings, and they just gave up. So we kept getting people were tantalizing us and saying, oh, we're going to buy this book, and then they didn't buy the book, and then again and again. It was turned down by almost everybody in London. I'm pretty sure every editor in London turned that book down. And then my agent was Anne McDermott, and she was really probably the only good agent I ever really had in a way. She did a good job for me on that book. She was in London at the time. There was a guy, big shot named Sonny Mehta, and Sonny was he had been at Picador just when I first moved to London, and he was very, very famous for starting these big, kind of the first, a trade paperback literary fiction. And Sonny was in town, and I was really kind of depressed at this time. I remember we'd been trying to sell a book for months, and I thought I was going to get some money to pay some bills. I was pretty depressed, so I went out of town, and I remember I went to some place. I was totally broke, and I went somewhere by myself, and I was just wandering around. And when I came back to London, I came back after several weeks, and I had all these messages on my phone. You never hear from your agent, never hear from him. And suddenly I had all these messages. So I called, and I found out that they'd sold the book to Knopf, who's like the best. This is like the biggest literary publisher in America, particularly at that time. But I don't know if that's still true. And Knopf had bought it, and they paid me some decent amount of money. And the story that Anne told me was that she had seen Sonny come through her office, and she stuck the manuscript in his face and said, take this with you and read it. And he took it literally from the office, took it to the plane. This is the story she told me, or he told me. He took it to the plane, he read it on the plane, and when he landed in New York, he made an offer. And he was really keen on the book. And he put a lot of publicity into it. Just his name was very important. So the fact that he bought it was very important. There was a lot of buzz, and they call buzz. And I got a lot of early reviews and so forth. It's easily the best, most widely reviewed book I ever got. It got lots of bad reviews because it was considered really this trendy book. It got more bad reviews than it probably normally would have, and it got more good reviews. Anyway, they put a lot of money into it. Sonny put a lot of money into the book. And I like to say it was a huge success, and maybe tons of money, and that's why I'm so successful. But actually, it didn't make any money at all. They lost. I think they lost a lot of money on the publication of this book, and it got a kind of good reputation from some people. And I still meet people who like this book. Like BK was kind enough to say he really liked the book. And every once in a while, if I know anybody who's ever heard of my books at all, they know that novel. After it came out, I remember people saying, "Oh, where did you get the idea for the book?" And I didn't really know where I ever got the idea. But then I was often being told by people, oh, it's like the tin drum, and I hate the tin drum. And they said, and other people would say, oh, it's like this or that. And I said, no, I didn't really know that book, or I wasn't wild about it. And then one day, it's always funny, the people who are most useful in literature are not the big shots and the reviewers. It's always these people at work in the offices. And I remember this woman coming up at Bloomsbury in London, and she said, you know, I couldn't figure out where the book came from, and then I realized it's from Peanuts. Because in Peanuts, you know, Snoopy and Linus and Charlie Brown are always talking about these philosophical things. And I realized that really was the biggest influence on the history of luminous motion. I would like to say it was the Tin Drum, or it was like, you know, Nietzsche or something like that. But it was actually Charles Schulz, probably, who I think probably had the biggest influence. And anyway, the history of luminous motion, it's sort of bumped along. It's a few people. It was a lot of big printing for that book. And again, most of it got remaindered. But because it was a big printing, it kind of, you know, it still kind of circulates at yard sales. Basically, if you want to buy my books, you have to go to yard sales. And then I talked about this a few months ago. I'm sure I'm repeating myself at this point. But then a small publisher, Calamari Press, I did a new introduction for my Kindle edition. I started putting all my books on Kindle, and Derek at Calamari Press, he did his own illustration for the cover, which I think is quite a lovely cover. So it is a new copies are available. I went on to it took me a few years to find the next novel. I mainly wrote short stories, and we made a movie deal on history, and it got me to do some screenwriting. So there's a lot of good things that happened because of history, and I made a little bit of money at the time, which I used. And it took me a few years to get to the next novel. And again, people were constantly trying to make me, Sonny tried to get me to write a detective series, I think. And people were always trying to get me to do something like history over and over again. And the first thing I didn't want to do anything like it again. I wanted to do something different. So I took a few years. I waited till I found another character I wanted to write about. And I started writing this book called What's Wrong with America, which is, it was turned down by publishers who said, you should say what's right about America. Please say what's right about America. And I wrote that. It's about a woman who's just totally full of life to me, and she came straight to life for me, and I loved writing that book just as much as history. And I remember sending that off to the publishers who had turned down history, and they said, "Oh, but now we'll buy your next book." And we sent that to them, and they didn't like that either. So Sonny didn't even reply. He didn't even want to hear. He didn't even want to talk about that book because it was an old lady living in the suburbs. Okay, so that's my personal adventure. That's why I'm so famous, why I'm so successful, why I have so much free time to do these videos. And I don't think I have anything else to say about it. That was it's been a good I had a good run with that book, and it's kept me writing ever since. It's helped me maintain the semblance of a career, and we'll come up with some more Pointless Adventures. I'm sure I've got plenty more Pointless Adventures to share with you. And BK, that was for you. Okay, stay safe.